I am Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years, and today I have my special guest. He is the author of the book Pickett's Dream, no other than Mr. Christopher Carsles.
Thank you, Dan.
Welcome, welcome to Book 101, Mr. Christopher. And can you please introduce more about yourself?
Sure. So this is I'm a writer. Have also am also an Episcopal priest. Worked as a college chaplain for 25 years. Worked for 10 years on the street, creating two homeless communities. And now work with military veterans who are suffering from depression, social isolation, suicide risk. But all the while, I have actually wrote The Complete Idiot's Guide to Understanding Intelligent Design, and then two novels. For Theirs is the Kingdom, which is this one that was published 3 years ago, and then the novel that you have up on the screen, Pickett's Dream, which was just published several months ago.
Mr. Christopher, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, talents to the world. And did I pronounce your last name correct?
It's Carlisle.
Carly, my apology.
No, that's all right.
So, Mr. Christopher, who is the central character of Picket Dreams? And what is the significance of his dreams?
Well, so the central character, John Pickett, is a young priest who emerges from sort of a shadowy past, but we find out later is a working class family member from sort of the Skids part of Rhode Island. He's met by the narrator, Brooke Adams, who's a blue-blooded, very wealthy guy who is sort of disenchanted with his life. And when the novel opens, he's just returned from Paris, where he was one of two or three guys who created a startup American newspaper, but it folded, and so he came back to his family house in Newport, Rhode Island, just in the shadows of the great mansions on Bellevue Avenue, and through several accidents, meets a girl that he knew as a young guy, and then subsequently goes to a wedding with her of the girl's sister, where he meets this mysterious guy named John Pickett. And from there, he finds his way to Newport, Rhode Island in sort of private pursuit of this young woman who happens to be married to the president of the Tennis Hall of Fame, and a former tennis champion himself, who's not the nicest guy. And so as a result, a relationship evolves between John Pickett and Athena Van Fleet, the young girl, married girl to the tennis champion, and then the fun begins.
The fun begins. So, what themes does Pickett's Dream explore throughout the book?
Yeah, well, so the novel was first drafted 30 years ago, in the late 80s, and it was very much a reflection of the 80s, the greed is good, go 80s, that was made famous by movies like Wall Street and so on, and Bonfire of the Vanities, anyway, so. I actually put the, it was almost published, and there were a couple of things that happened to keep it from being published by McClellan and Stewart, which is a literary house in Toronto. And I put it on the shelf and then picked it up after I finished my first novel that I just showed you, um, and began to rewrite it. And in the process of doing that, realized that really the mayhem, the greed that we find ourselves in American culture in the year 2024 probably found its beginnings. I believe it did find its beginnings or recent beginnings in the 80s. And we are now sort of harvesting the what I would consider to be largely sort of the rotten fruits of that time. And Pickett's Dream is really a reflection on what happened over the course of those 40 years. But it's not a simple sort of, it's not a morality tale, a moral tale, because Pickett himself is a very complicated character. He's really hard to figure out. He's clearly consumed by this childhood love, Athena Van Fleet, and believes that the only way to get her is to outdo her husband, and decides the way to do that is to buy a very famous, still very famous mansion in Newport, Rhode Island called Rosecliff, which he does, and no one can figure out how he did it because people know that he came from a working class past.
How does the story blend reality and the dream world?
Well, one of the things that that is, I think, true about the American vision is that it is a at the same time that we are in trouble, I think, because greed has overtaken our culture. There is a kind of intrinsic romance about being an American, and this idea of manifest destiny, that somehow, we are each chosen to realize a destiny that is really romantic by nature. And at the same time, we bump up against the harsh realities of day-to-day living, competition, greed, and so on. And so the question is it possible to love beautiful things, to love beauty, to live in a romantic world, and at the same time, day to day, deal with the concrete challenges of just being alive, making a living, and so on. So it really, I mean, your question is very well taken, because it is that tension between the romance of what might be possible with the day-to-day reality of having to slog our ways through the day and make a living.
What historical or cultural context shapes the event in Pickett's Dreams?
Well, again, that's an interesting question that I think I answer better now than I could have answered it, when I was writing it and when it was first published. Because one of the things that critics, reviewers have said time and again is that it's very reminiscent of The Great Gatsby. And while I was aware of that to some degree, because I love that novel, and lo and behold, it's now 100 years exactly from its publication. I now sort of realize that it is a story that parts company, because it's very different from what happens on Long Island in the 1920s, but at the same time, the themes of hope possibility up against greed and sort of the mean spiritedness of some people, is those sort of themes are common to both stories.
Very well said, Mr. Christopher. Very well said. And how do Pickett's dreams reflect his internal struggles or aspirations?
Well, I guess I would say that, and now I'm speaking for myself, but I suspect I'm speaking on behalf of a lot of people. Most of us want to live a good life. That is to say, good in the sense that that we want to find the goodness in ourselves and other people, and we want to live a full life. At the same time that we have those aspirations, we're also drawn to beautiful things, to wealth, to romance, to a beautiful life that is aesthetically challenging to the kind of goodness that that sometimes we aspire to and can't quite get at. And we see those two things as being in competition. And I'm actually, I think very often they are in competition, but sometimes they're not. And one of the things that I tried to do in depicting John Pickett was to find somebody who had a kind of innocence about childhood love that he wanted to bring into adulthood. He recognized the need to create this beautiful life that he imagined his love, Athena Van Fleet, would want. But he did not want to lose what he knew to be good, and actually, which he did not want to sort of lose what I suspect was his motivation to do good in the world as a priest and outside of his being a priest. And so the question of how you navigate the moral life with a material life, which we all have to live, because after all, we're all material beings, is something that I think is quite relevant and topical now, particularly when you see, the generations underneath mine, Gen Zs and so on, who clearly show a desire to do the right thing and are not happy with the system as it is now. That's what, as I was finishing this novel, I was thinking increasingly this is relevant to younger generations, specifically, Gen X and down to Gen Z, because I see an enormous amount of hope in those generations. In fact, to be honest, far more hope than I see in boomers and so on. And so, I found myself increasingly excited about writing this novel because I felt like I was really trying to address a generation that I believe in.
How does the book use symbolisms within Pickett's dreams?
Sorry, could you say that again?
What does the book use symbolism within Pickett's dreams?
Well, I think that the most important dynamic in Pickett's dream is the dynamic between or dynamics between wealth and poverty, and this is not only something that Christianity grapples with, but Judaism grapples with, and is very much a part of the Buddhist vision and Islam and so on. How do you live the fullest life you can live? And so I think in the case of Pickett, and also in the internal narrative of the narrator, both of them in different ways really wrestle with how we can sort of reach beyond our own self-interest to dwell in the interest of those who've been left on the margins. And a key character in Pickett's Dream, who doesn't appear many times but is really critical, particularly at the end, is someone who is homeless and who has been sort of victimized by the system, and who represents, the marginalized one. And obviously, in the religious traditions, there are always marginalized people. In Christianity, it's Jesus. In Judaism, you see Moses and so on. And so at the end of the novel, you have this character who is out on the street, who really has been left out of the system, and who also happens to bear the greatest wisdom of all of them, in saying, essentially, when all is said and done, the full life will only be attained by generosity, by being generous. And I think that is symbolized in all of the great religious traditions, and also the great secular traditions, that generosity is what makes the world work.
Yes, being generous people is something else. So, how did you structure the book around the concept of dreaming?
Around the concept of,
Dreaming.
well, one of the things that I realized as I was writing this is that I love beautiful things, and I love beautiful houses and beautiful landscapes and beautiful women. All of that is very much a part of me, and a part of a dream that probably has been in me since I was a little boy. And so it's no accident that when ultimately we pick up Pickett when he's very young, because we're picking up, my own voice as a young person, and then to recognize for myself what it was that I dreamt since I was a little boy that would make my life as meaningful as possible. And then in the process, what were the things that I thought were part of the dream, that I thought would work, that I thought would bring fulfillment, that didn't? And those, and so that really became the structure of the novel, because what you had was a story between a very innocent, very clever, enigmatic priest, a narrator who's sort of, troubled with his own life and trying to make the right choices. And then this culprit, Ted Talbot, the tennis player who has to retire early from the tennis circuit by injury and becomes the president of the Tennis Hall of Fame, and who's just an SOB from the beginning to the end. And what happens when you have a dream like that, and then you encounter, real guys, pretty despicable characters who are not going to give up until they've completely destroyed you. And so that really becomes the conflict that carries the story from beginning to end.
How did Pickett's dreams influence his actions in the waking world?
Well, the story begins at his little country church, where he's marrying Athena Van Fleet's sister, doing the marriage. And that is what ultimately brings him to be the rector, the priest in the big affluent parish in Newport, Rhode Island, where where the conflicts begin and where the fun begins. Um, and I'm sorry, you asked a second part of that question where I was going to. Do you remember?
Yes. How did Pickett influence his actions in the
Oh
world?
yes, yeah. Thank you. So one could imagine that Pickett's chance encounter with the woman that he loved never happened, and he would have just continued a fairly sort of uneventful life. But then when he goes to Newport and he has this opportunity to re-encounter Athena, albeit a married Athena, he comes to believe that because she herself lives a very affluent and privileged life, and he comes from Pawtucket, Rhode Island, a working class place, the way for him to realize that dream is to essentially render the same kind of privileged life that he saw all around him in Newport. And then I won't go into the how he does it, but ultimately he works a scheme whereby he successfully buys Rosecliff Mansion that is deserted and on the market, and brings it back to life. And so his life direction goes, from a fairly sort of uneventful, not terribly unusual life in the country, to taking these terrible risks, which ultimately render this incredible Gatsby-like life on Bellevue Avenue. And yet, at the same time that he lives in this, this amazing place, and I go to great pains to describe its beauty, because I feel that it is one of the most beautiful houses in the world. But as he goes about making his life, he then realizes that it's not going to that's really not what matters. And so the sort of tightrope that John Pickett himself walks is that at the same time that if you saw him, you'd say, my God, this is a Gatsby guy. And who knows, what he's up to. One realizes toward the end that his wealth, that his house, that Aston Martins and all of that, that the story entails, is really irrelevant to him. And so it would be easy to really misjudge him, to think that essentially what he wanted was simply a life of wealth and privilege, when in fact what he wanted was a woman whom he loved and probably mistakenly decided would only have him if he accomplished those things.
Mr. Christopher, what will be your advice for those aspiring writers out there?
Well, I think the most difficult thing for me, particularly as I was beginning, and for friends and co-writers that I know, is to believe in yourself, and to believe. Hemingway said, something like, write the truest thing you know. And that's not exactly as he put it, but the point, I think, one of the things Hemingway was trying to say was, believe in your voice, believe in your perspective, believe in your ability. If you write the truest thing you know, you can't go wrong. But the world out there is always telling, particularly artists, why they can't do it. And they're the ones who are wrong. And those who are willing to make the sacrifices that are implied by being an artist, they're the ones who de facto are right.
Yes, people. Very well said, Mr. Christopher. Very well said. And you have the passion of writing. Go, go, go. Share to the world. And what is your short-term and long-term goals in writing?
Beg your pardon?
What is your short-term and long-term goals in writing?
Well, I'm working now on a third novel about um, a, sort of a professor of English who wrote a novel that made one splash, got a job teaching at a local at Amherst College. Actually, which is where I live, and loses his job and his family through several sort of unfortunate circumstances, and ends up living next to an abandoned train station and in a tent, and meets an African American veteran who also is living outside. And the story is about their friendship and the wisdom that he learns out on the margins, which he never knew when he was growing up with relative privilege. And, I think for me, this is a really important step in my writing, because I believe that people on the margins, whether they're on the economic margins, social margins, artistic margins, people who are not in the centers of power, are the ones who have the wisdom and the voice that this world needs. And so this novel is really an attempt to say, those of us who want to write and to tell the truth need to have the courage to go stand out on the margins, listen to the wisdom of those people who have been on the outside, and then bring it to the center and to those people in positions of power who desperately need to hear that wisdom.
Definitely looking forward for your goals, Mr. Christopher. And again, Mr. Christopher Carlisle, thank you so much for sharing your dreams to the world. And
Well,
can you please invite our listeners to support all your books?
thank you, Daniel, and thank you, audience. I greatly appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Christopher Carlisle, because if you support him, more empowering books to come. So, do you have something to promote for your next book?
Well, I'm only just early on in it. It's called Not Even Angels, and it's a story, as I say, about a professor who loses his job and his family, but refuses to leave his hometown, because of his love of his children. So, yeah, that's number 3.
Looking forward to it, Mr. Christopher. So, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Daniel.
Welcome, people. See you soon. You are most welcome to come back.